morning, everyone. Relationships are real. I think they are, the power of that is on display this morning. My name is Javier Guzman. I'm the Regional Director for Big Picture Learning, Southwest, so California, give it up for the West Coast, and East Coast, because I grew up in New York City. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker today, and so we're pleased to welcome civil rights and community activist DeRay McKesson to join the conversation at this year's Big Bang. As many of you may already know, DeRay's activism focuses primarily on issues of innovation, equity, and social justice, all issues that we here at Big Picture value and strive to address in our schools and in our communities on a daily basis. Born and raised in Baltimore, DeRay graduated from Bowdoin College and holds an honorary doctorate from the New School and the Maryland Institute College of Art. DeRay is a leading voice in the Black Lives Matter movement. Spurred by the death of Mike Brown and the subsequent protests in Ferguson, Missouri, DeRay has become a key voice in the effort to confront the systems and structures that have led to the mass incarceration and police killings of Black and other minority populations. He is also the host of Pod Save the People. Give it up for Pod Save the People. A weekly podcast focused on activism and social justice. DeRay was also a math teacher, and then he trained and supported teachers as the youngest chief of human capital for Baltimore City Public Schools. DeRay was named as one of the world's greatest leaders by Fortune magazine in 2015, and as one of the 30 most important people on the internet by Time magazine in 2016. Please join me in welcoming DeRay McKesson.
It's an honor to be here. You know, I don't do as many talks on education as I wish I would. I talk a lot about the police so much, but it's good to be in a place where people remember the power of classrooms. I often think about classrooms as the last radical space in America, the last place where people still believe in the importance of ideas, where we fight about what the best idea can be and how to challenge people to find it. I taught 6th grade math in East New York, Brooklyn, which was incredible. 6th grade, I still think, is the absolute best grade. 7th grade is puberty and deodorant, and it is bad. But 6th grade is still a lot of joy. You know, 6th graders come in, and every day I'd be like, "You're a math magician," and they're like, "Yes." The 7th graders would be like, "What is happening?" But 6th grade was still a lot of joy, and I taught 60, 90, and 120-minute classes of math to 11-year-olds, which is a very long time for any of you math teachers out there. And this one day, my students were like, "Can we go to gym early?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, you can go to gym early. I've had you 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th period." And it was like, "I'm tired of you, y'all are tired of me, love the gym teacher, y'all can go." And they come back really quickly. And I'm like, "Why are y'all back so quick?" And when I realized that they're in love with the idea of gym more than the work of gym. And I say that because in this moment, I think there are people more in love with the idea of resistance than the work of resistance. And I've spent the last sort of 2 years trying to think about what does the work look like? 4 years ago when we were in the street in Ferguson, it was everybody was talking about justice and everybody was talking about race. And 4 years later, I was worried that people had only had a conversation and hadn't actually thought about what the work looked like. I think about back in those early days, if you ever saw us marching in the street, it wasn't that we thought marching was cool, it was that it was illegal to stand still in August, September, and October of 2014, that if we stood still for more than 5 seconds, we were arrested. And sometimes I think that we can get so far away from those moments that we forget that the work has to continue. And this doesn't mean that the ideas aren't important. We think about ideas like equity and equality, that equity is the idea that everybody gets what they need and deserve. Equality, the notion that everybody gets the same thing. And we know that the work of justice is almost always the work of equity. How do we make sure that our kids get what they need and deserve every day? And that is an idea. But when I've stepped back and tried to think about what the work looks like, I've come to remind myself that we have to listen better. And that part of the listening sets us up to imagine the world that we know that we deserve. I think about those early days in the classroom. In my first week in the classroom, I taught this lesson on dividing decimals, which was hands down the absolute worst lesson I ever taught. I taught, again, 90-minute classes, and 20 minutes in, I realized I just didn't have it. It just wasn't there. But in that same week, I remember a kid coming up to me and he said, "I'm not really good at math." He was like, I'm just not smart at math. I've never been there. And that is what he said to me. And I remember in those early days, before I knew what I was doing, what I heard him say, or what I took away from that is this kid has some issues. I got to teach him. I got to figure out these gaps. And what I wasn't hearing was that he hadn't yet understood that math could be a place where he could experience success. What I wasn't hearing yet is that every kid wants to be in a place where they can experience success. And what the best teachers do is make classrooms where every day people can get close to what success looks like. What I wasn't hearing, and what I didn't yet understand at that moment, is that what the best teachers do is that they remind students that they already had the gift before they met me. And that my work is to make sure they find that gift every single day, long before I'm gone, and long after they know me. And then what the worst teachers do is make students feel like the gift is only present in their presence. But I think about the difference between what he said, what I heard, and what I wasn't hearing. And I think about that sort of three in a lot of ways, because sometimes we can't locate the problem because we aren't hearing beyond the first statement. I think about this too because I was a chief of human capital in Baltimore, and sometimes when we sit at the table, we are really just playing musical chairs with the status quo. That we're in these big systems and we think that we're doing something different, and it's really just moving around the same bad things that haven't worked. And as the chief of human capital, I was in a lot of spaces. So I managed everything to do with adults. So from the transactional work, so benefits, unemployment, those sort of things, to all of the strategic work around adults. So all PD that wasn't content wrote up to me. And I'd be in a lot of meetings. And I'll never forget some of the hardest meetings to be in were around school closures. Because we would be in the room and we'd be trying to figure out what to do with a declining population in the city, not enough money, and we had to close these schools. And we would go to a school board meeting, and what community members would say is that we need this building. They're like, we need this school. This school has been really important to us. And what staff would say is, but nobody's learning. And nobody's learned in that building for 20 years, That's what people would respond with. And what I realized that what staff were hearing was those parents don't care about those kids if they would let them sit in a school where nobody was learning. That is the way it translated. But what they weren't hearing was that those parents just didn't trust you. What they weren't hearing was that that building that you just call a building was a place where people built community, was a place where people celebrated, was a place where people managed the trauma of being in a neighborhood that was tough. So all those graduations and step-up ceremonies, they meant something to them. When you said that that teacher wasn't teaching them how to read, parents were saying that teacher taught my kid how to love themselves. And that's what staff wasn't hearing. They weren't hearing that they didn't trust the district to put anything better than what was already there because we'd never delivered on that promise in our history. And it reminded me that there's a difference between sometimes what people say, what we hear, and what we don't hear the first time. I think about even when we stood in the streets that we said no justice, no peace. It was a chant that I remember the most from those early days, and a chant that people still carry with them in the street today, this idea of no justice, no peace. Now, some people hear that as a threat. But when we take it a step further, we've always understood that as a statement and a reminder of fact. That any call for justice that is not rooted, any call for peace that is not rooted in the demand for justice is just a call for order and compliance. And we know that the justice that our lives deserve is never rooted in something as basic as order and compliance. And we don't want an abstract justice predicated on an abstract peace. We want something that we can feel and touch and see and hear. We want a justice that says that Mike Brown is coming home today, and that Freddie Gray is coming back from work, and that Rakia Boyd is going to another cookout. We want something made real. We want a justice that lives and breathes in this space. And we want something that we can touch. Now, I think about this as a call for justice, not only in our classrooms, but our courtrooms, our bedrooms, and our boardrooms, and our suites and our streets. We want a justice beyond survival. So when we say no justice, no peace, it is a reminder that we don't know what a peace looks like not rooted in something as concrete as justice. And some people will say that we're asking for a demand too great, but we know that this is a demand that we've already paid for. And it is why we say no justice, no peace. When we think about a third of all the people killed in this country by strangers killed by a police officer, that's not justice. We think about classrooms across this country where kids can't read and write, that is not justice. When we think about the fact that we arrest more people for weed than all violent crimes combined, that's not justice. And some people want to say that we caused this problem, but we didn't cause this problem. We know that we inherited this problem. And that when we think about 6 million ex-felons that can't vote, 5 million people on probation and parole, 2 million people in prisons and jails, that's not justice. And those are big numbers, and sometimes the problem can feel so big, but the number one is an easier number to understand, but doesn't always help you figure out the scale piece. It doesn't always help people realize that this is like a big problem in a big way, until that one person is your father, your mother, your brother, or your sister. And we think about this as located in this idea that it takes one to change a system. And when we say no justice, no peace in the street, we are reminding people that because we haven't seen peace in our homes, in our communities in so long, we're going to disrupt everybody else's. So when we shut down streets and courtrooms, when we blockaded buildings, it was about saying that this is the least we can do to make you feel a part of the pain that we feel every single day in communities. And sometimes people say the system is broken, and people respond to them and say it's not broken, it's working exactly like it was designed. And to those people, we say we remember that this was designed, that people made this, and because people made this, people can make something different. We don't think about that as a defeatist statement. We think about that as a true call to action. And we know that this is not a system of constants, and this is not a system of chance, that this is a system of choices. If they can rewrite the tax code on the back of scrap paper and napkins in the middle of the night, then we can redo this whole thing really quickly too. And we remember that this call for social justice is almost redundant in some ways because we don't know what a justice looks like that isn't social. That a part of justice is always about having a dream that is bigger than something that benefits you. And we understand that as a part of the work. And people often confuse justice and accountability, but we know that justice is never having to experience a trauma in the first place. So I say that because, again, some people heard that cry for no justice, no peace inside as a threat. But when we dig deeper, what we understood that they weren't hearing was that was just a statement of fact. And not too long ago, I was at dinner somewhere, and this guy came up to me, and he was like, DeRay, I get intersectionality, it sort of makes sense to me, but I am struggling with how to apply it. He was like, I don't know what to do with it in so many ways. And I was like, okay. And what I immediately heard was like a cop-out. I felt like he was telling me this thing to set up that I can't do anything about it. But when I listened a little deeper, what I realized that he was looking for tools. He was trying to figure out how to think about this complicated idea in a more concrete way. And people misunderstand intersectionality often. They think about it as intersecting identities, and it is not about intersecting identities, it's about intersecting systems of oppression. So it's about how those identities are linked to a system of oppression that is bigger than just the moment. And what I asked him in that moment is a question that I'll ask you to think about. I asked him, when is the last time that you felt unsafe? And he sat with it. And it's interesting because I ask people this question a lot, and by different sort of perspectives that people come from, they answer differently. I asked a straight white man the last time he felt unsafe, and he said, when I didn't have money. And I was like, that's really interesting. You ask a woman when they don't feel safe, and they have a million examples of not feeling safe in their body, in their mind, in their emotions. I think about as a gay black man, when I haven't felt safe, when people have said faggot, when people have threatened my body. And when I asked him in that moment, he was like, the last time he didn't feel safe in his body was when the police are around him. And in that moment, we were starting to think about how the responses to those questions are just so different for people. And how when you think about how somebody else's answer to when the last time they didn't feel safe was, helps you think about all the systems of oppression bearing down on people's lives that don't necessarily impact you. And I had to listen deeper because when my first reaction was he's trying to cop out, my second reaction was he needs a different set of tools. And in that moment, it was this question about like, when do you not feel safe? When's the last time that you haven't felt safe? In another place, we were talking about the power of words to change community and the power of words to change the way that people interacted in space. And what I asked the person in front of me was, think about every single word that you use to describe sex, or that you've heard used to describe sex. And we went down and we listed them, and it was like shag, bang, cut, smash, all these words. And it was like every single word that people can think of, none of them are about intimacy. They're about a lot of things, it's not intimacy. That all of them are like hard words, these violent words that don't actually convey a sense of shared power, that don't convey a sense of like loving in the way that our words do sometimes. And I use that as an example of the way that words shape the way that we enter into spaces. And sometimes what you hear is that word and people laugh it off and people don't think about that these words are often the first ways that we distribute power, and that power is redistributed over and over. And I say that because there's always this interplay between what we hear, what somebody says, what we hear, and then what we don't hear. And what I thought about a lot in this work is how we make sure that we are listening in a way that sets us up to imagine a world that is better than this. That people often talk about the right, and they're like, how do they have such an easy sort of position when they think about their messaging and da-da-da? It's like the easy thing for them is that they're trying to take us back to a time that we've already lived through. We've survived Jim Crow the first time. Sessions is trying to take us back another time. When we think about the work that we're trying to do, we're trying to build a world we've never seen before. When we think about a world where every kid can read and write, we don't know what that looks like. We're trying to force that into existence. If you talk to people about like healthcare, single payer, if you talk about everybody having healthcare, you're trying to convince somebody of something that we've never seen in this country ever. So our work at its root is dream work. We're trying to paint a picture for people to like believe and see something that they can fight for. And we believe that if you can't imagine it, you can't fight for it. That if you can't help people see something bigger than themselves, then it'll never be something that they're willing to put themselves on the line for. And we think about that every single day in this work. I was on a panel recently with two people who you probably don't know. One is Jerry Lorenzo, the designer of Fear of God, and the second is Pastor Rich. You definitely know of Pastor Rich because he married our beloved Kanye and Kim. And I was listening to some of Pastor Rich's sermons before I moderated that talk, and one of the sermons he has was on hope. And what he said is a question I'll leave you with at the end. In this sermon, he says, if God answered all your prayers, would it just change you or would it change the world? And I think about that a lot because there are a lot of us who talk about the work of justice, who talk about the work of equity, but if we got everything we wish for, it would just change us. And we know that a world of justice will mean that we have to have a dream that is bigger than us. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, DeRay. We're going to try something a little new and different. So, you know, DeRay does Pod Save the People, and we thought we would have a kind of podcast-style conversation with our recipients, our alumni recipients. So I want to invite Ryan and Natalia up to the stage. I think a common theme that you will notice this morning is, you know, in DeRay's remarks, you heard him talk about operating in a brave space, and in Natalia's story and what she's trying to do herself, operating in a brave space, and what Ryan is trying to do with bringing people together, operating in a brave space, and the work of big picture learning. We've been in that space for a while, you know. So definitely there's a theme around that. And so we're going to try and have a conversation about activism and what it means to be in that space of, in that intersection of education and activism. Thank you.
Here we go. We're going to start with a conversation. So my first question is for you, Natalia, is how do you find it to have conversations with people about justice in a moment where it feels like everything is sort of falling apart? Like, what is like your hook to make people believe that if they join the work that you're doing or like start to do work that it might actually have an impact, when so many people would say that they've tried everything and like the outcomes haven't changed?
I think that's a great question. So 2 things. I think 1, I always steer back to history. And 2, I always focus it on hope. So as far as history, like we have a strong history of the civil rights movement and what that has accomplished for our people right now. And also about the Black Panther movement and what that means in terms of like community organizing and bringing people together at the same time as educating people to what power we have as a unit, and what we can do as individuals also for our community. So I definitely talk about that history component. And of course, I think it's always great to just give people hope. And I think, just laying out information for people is extremely helpful to help them, again, imagine and dream about what kind of solutions can be made.
And Ryan, same question for you. Like, how do you help people think about this notion that we can change the system in a moment where people feel like everything is sort of falling apart?
I guess I will go back to what I do in Philadelphia, where I bring police into high schools, not only El Centro, different high schools throughout the city, to show them a different side of the coin, so to say, and to show them a different side of police in this time of need, with social media showing a mainly bad side of the coin.
Now, I don't want to, I'm a little skeptical about the other side of the police. So I'm interested to hear, like, what have you found be productive in those conversations where police officers are coming in? And I ask because, police are sort of interesting. They do this thing where they are like, we shouldn't be social workers, like we should be police. And then they are like trying to be in everybody's school and start a football program, right? Mm-hmm. So they sort of do both sides of it. So what have you seen to be effective in those conversations?
Honesty and freedom, and just I get police officers who really want to be there. I don't want you there if you were forced to be there. If someone just was like, oh, well, just go here and check it out. No, I want you to be able to want to talk to the kids and give back.
Got it. Nabir, how do you think about setting up, creating big spaces like this for people to interact with each other that is not just sort of like talking about the talk that everybody has heard before, but that people like learn and grow from? And that is no critique of the choir. Like, I think the choir has to go to rehearsal and the choir needs to learn new music, so like everybody choir it up. But how do you make sure that people like also learn in big spaces, especially in a context feel like they're falling apart?
Hello? All right, here we go. I think part of our job is to frame or reframe what the narrative is, right? And to give folks the power to be courageous. And as an example, I've been reading about Baltimore, which I think you can appreciate, and some of this will resonate, right? So in November, this kind of came out that 1/3 of Baltimore high school students, right, 0% proficiency in math, right? And then you pair that with the number of murders and the killing of young black men in the city, and maybe a coincidence, maybe there's something to look into, right? But when we look at that proficiency again, right, at 0% proficient, right, that means that the school system, that also means that the school system is saying that when you walk into the school, we regard you as a failure, right? So the narrative for young black men that are going to school is saying, you are a failure in this space. So it puts schools in a place of skepticism, right? I can't trust you because this is how you look at me, right? So our job is to give folks the courage and the bravery to say, that's not all you are, right? Let's design around your interests. Let's design around the things that we know that are in there, that you have passions and interests and talents that need to be cultivated and brought out. So once you get into the space of designing around that, then you enter a space that you have that it requires action. So I think that's kind of like our role of what Big Picture tries to do, right? To step into that space and to take action and design around kids.
And I pushed you, I was a chief in Baltimore when that came out. And what people heard, what people received from that was that we had schools of dumb kids, right? That was like literally one of the things that people not in the city would say, is that it's like all those dumb kids in Baltimore. You're like, no, like a classroom full of third graders that can't read is not dumb third graders. That is like adults who failed them, right? Like that is like what happened. And when you don't invest in kids, like kids don't magically learn how to read. If there are no books, it's hard to read, right? Like that's like a sort of a no-brainer. And it was this sort of interesting interplay between like what the data showed and what people received from it. It wasn't this call for like, how do I invest more? It was like, of course those kids can't read. And you're like, that just can't be a part of the work. I say that, and I'll start with you again, Ivy. Like, what are there any sort of pieces of the education space or like the youth development space that you think we are not talking about in public as much as we should?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things we're not talking about in at least in any sort of courageous way, right? When we talk about that, I mean, you interrogate a school schedule, for example, right? A school schedule, a traditional school schedule is really an outdated model, right? And you will hear reformers talk about our education is based on a manufacturing model, but sometimes what you don't hear is that manufacturing model was inappropriate anyway, so it was never designed to empower folks. So I think that what learning is, I think what we aren't talking about is that schools cannot achieve equity on their own, right? So that space of community and school needs to be cultivated. Those relationships need to be real. The work that Ryan is doing, the work that Natalia is doing. How do you bridge? How do you get kids well attached to their communities on multiple levels? I think it's a space that is ready for innovation. We're not talking about that. Kids need to be well attached to the communities, and the communities that they're in need to be valued.
And Ryan, what have you learned in getting adults and young people to work together productively? Like, what are the lessons that you can share about like how to do those partnerships in a way that is mutually beneficial and not so, I think about when I was a young person, I showed up in a lot of rooms with adults and they wanted to be my parents. They weren't interested in being my peers. Like, how do we push back against that sort of paternalism and create spaces where young people and adults can actually sit down at the table together?
Well, I go back to being yourself. I'm going to be who I'm going to be regardless of where I am. And if I go into a room where an adult is trying to be my parent, of course I'm going to let them know that I'm here to work with them. I'm not here, of course I want to learn from you or from everyone in the room, but I'm not here to be, schooled. So, I got no hair on my tongue. I let them know from the door. And if they don't like it, then I'll go connect with someone else, but eventually they're going to see what I'm doing and want to come back.
And Natalia, how have you chosen the issues that you've decided to put your energy into? Like, what was the decision-making process, given that there's so many things at this moment that we could choose from?
Oof, that's hard, because I think there are a lot of issues, and I think personally, I try to focus on issues where I know there's a lot of potential to organize a community around. So for example, one of the things that I've been focusing on is organizing the Buffalo community to attend police oversight committee meetings. A lot of them don't even know about police oversight committee meetings, even though a lot of them have complaints about it. But they're not even aware of this forum where they can voice their concerns. Second, they don't even know that it's even accessible to them, right? So I work with a group called Just Resisting in Buffalo, and we literally go out into the streets, like the east and west side of Buffalo, knock on doors, and hey, can I come inside? I want to talk to you about something. 5-10 minute conversation. And then we even help them even get to the place when it happens.
And what are you hearing when you're talking to them? What are you hearing from them?
It varies. I think it varies with their own experiences with police. I've been in a home where I spoke to one of the mother of a police officer who is extremely problematic, and who actually is responsible for the death of one of the folks that we were trying to advocate for. So I thought that conversation was pretty interesting. But it varies from experiences, right? But I think any Black or brown folk, even if they have a family member who is a police officer, I think they are aware of how the community feels about it. So I think sometimes I don't mean to like go around in a circle, but I think they present themselves first as a Black or person of color and their experience, and then they go back to, well, I have a personal connection with a police officer because he's my son. And then they go back to, well, I support it or I don't support it.
And then last question on this is what skills do you think people need to be able to have those conversations in community? So I ask because I think a lot of this work, it's like a lot of information. We pushed out a lot of information over the past 4 years. I think that we've not yet done enough skill building to like match the flow of information that we pushed out to people. So what are the skills that you think people need to be successful in the work that you do?
I think just being personable and just treating people like human beings. I think, and being sure that the language that you use is one that can be receptive from the community, right? I think a lot of educators and a lot of professionals, we tend to, delve into research and we understand how the system works, but when we try to explain it to people that actually experience it, I think that's where the communication breaks because of the language that we use. So I think it's important to make sure that we present ourselves as being personable. And also I think it's important to talk for that person who's speaking to the community to have personal experiences too.
Nabila, you talked about brave spaces. How do you define a brave space, and like how do we create those in more places than they exist right now?
Well, I think of the work that Ryan is doing, for example. I think that's a brave space to operate in. I personally, might have trauma around police as well, but that Ryan is saying, I know what the feedback and the noise will be in the background, but I'm still going to bring police and I'm still going to bring these folks, and it might be messy, and I might not know exactly how to do that. I think you have to embrace sometimes that sort of messiness, right? That sort of struggle and discomfort. Schools don't know what to do about civic engagement. They talk about like, yes, our students need to be civically engaged, but school is not designed that way. School is sort of like, it is a moving train, and it has a perspective, and so to step into the space of being civic-minded means pushing back on that, So you kind of have to think outside the box sometimes, the way our alumni are doing right now. How do you give the skills? I think the experiences, right, need to come first, and the relationships need to come first, right? Changing a system, it is transactional, but it's also relational, and you can't do it without building relationships.
Mm-hmm. And Ryan, what do we know this work is exhausting and hard and not always as quick as we want it to be. Where do you go? How do you fill yourself up in the moments where it is hardest? Like, what do you do to get through the tough moments?
I go back and look at pictures that I take from the forums. I keep connected with some of the students, and I just go and really I see something different every time I look at a photo. I see students engaging, but I see students that are happy, that want to be there, that you would think wouldn't really want to show up, but they showed up and turned out. So I do self-care, you know what I mean? That's important. So I really love what I do. So it's like not really too much of difficult moments that I go through. The most difficult moments is probably when we didn't properly screen a kid and he wasn't ready at that time and he lashes out. That's probably the most difficult. But even then, like we had one kid, and we actually spoke to him in the hallway, and I was upset at first because he used the F word towards the facilitator. But then when we had when we spoke one-on-one outside, it was awesome, and I understood where he was coming from.
Natalia, you, like, what do you do to get through, like, the moments that are harder in this work than the other moments?
I think just two things. So I think definitely reminding myself that I love my people so much and this is why I'm doing it. So that definitely gets me through certain things that happen that are not to my favor. But second, I think anger. I think anger in of itself, if you take care of it properly, I think it can be productive. I don't know if that makes sense, but to give you an example is the AG from New York came to a decision that a man called Wardell Davis, that he died under police custody, and then it came out that it wasn't, the police wasn't responsible for it. So that was definitely a moment of anger for me, but I use that as a way to motivate me to just remind myself that there's a lot of work that needs to do in order for these decisions to not continue to happen. So definitely like anger and just reminding myself that I love my people so much that there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
In the last couple of questions, we often talk about this idea of telling truth to power, but also this idea of taking the truth with us everywhere. And I'll start with you, Javier. Like, can you give us a story where you've taken the truth somewhere that was not necessarily the most comfortable thing to do, but it was the right thing to do?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of schools that operate in the alternative education space. So what happens in alternative education, how that system is designed is the kid is not doing well in the traditional high school or the large comprehensive high school, and so they're pushed out. And when they're pushed out, they sort of go into this new system, right? And if for any of you that work in the alternative ed space, it's the packet system, right? Here's this assignment, do it, and you get your credit. So I've been fortunate enough to work with and meet individuals who want to push against that system, and part of that has been telling the truth, right? That what you're doing here. You might be a model continuation school, right? But you're not serving kids well, and there's large inequity here, and a lot of the students in that space, are minorities, right? So that truth telling, beginning with, I'm gonna say something that's really uncomfortable. I don't know how you're gonna address it or handle that, but. Yeah, I think that's one example of being in a space where the only way to move is by telling the truth of what you see, in hopes that we will begin to redesign that space, and reframe what happens for students in alternative ed.
Brian?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, like a moment where you had to take the truth with you somewhere where it was not necessarily the most comfortable thing to do, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, okay, so over the school year, I went to a middle school called Stetson in Philadelphia, and my experience with school district schools and the police, a majority of them come from outside of the Philadelphia counties and neighborhoods. They come from different counties, even from as far as out of state, So I was in a room filled with predominantly white teachers, and none of them were from Philadelphia. And it was uncomfortable sharing my story and how to teach kids just like me. They come from the same exact thing as me. And it was uncomfortable, sharing my experiences growing up in the hood, because you get the, oh, really? Wow. Ooh, I only seen that in a movie. But
They're like, you're alive. You're
like,
thank you.
That was uncomfortable, but it was needed, because at the end, everyone did come up and thank me. I even came back to actually speak to the kids. And the teachers, I had a few teachers actually say that it helped them. But for me personally, it was a little uncomfortable.
Talia?
So I'm part of the Black Law Students Association at my law school, and we created a pre-law chapter at the high school that I work at, which is predominantly Black and Latinos. And what we've done is we partner up with the Minority Bar Association, which is like Black and minority attorneys, and we do Know Your Rights session. And I think one of I wouldn't say it was uncomfortable, it was just so I didn't want to tell them the truth, even though I know that they knew it. It was basically, we inform the students like what they should be doing when at a police stop or a traffic stop, right? You know, as a Black and brown person, like we all know what happens, right? A lot of us get murdered, or a lot of us get beaten up by police. But I guess my issue with doing the Know Your Rights session is that even though this is what's supposed to happen, this is not what happens. So I think a comfortable part about that was that, yeah, I'm telling you what should be happening at a traffic stop, but I'm not assuring you that this is what's gonna happen. So.
I think about recently I was talking to a young person who was going through teacher training, and he's like really jazzed up. And right now there are a lot of teachers that are like, I'm gonna teach justice, like every student's gonna be an activist, like that's like the thing. So I got this call, and he's like, DeRay, and like all of my students gonna be activists, and he's really pushing the teacher training program he's in to be better. And I'm like, you should push, you should challenge. But I had to remind him, like, if your kids can't read, then like all this other stuff is just fluff, right? That like, if you're like putting together these dope lesson plans around Frederick Douglass and da-da-da, and you haven't taught the kids how to read, like that's actually not helpful. Mm-hmm. And you know, he was calling me as like the activist, so he thought I was gonna be like, yes, fight the power, teach him about Douglass. And I'm like, you should do all of that. But like some of the most important work that we can do as educators is actually set kids up with a set of skills that they'll be able to take everywhere. And that I think what we've done too often is that we think that love is the only skill that our kids need. So you go to a lot of programs with a whole lot of love and nothing else. Like kids can't read, they can't write, no math, like can't dream, don't know no history. But it's like there's a dope basketball program, and you're like, that's just not it. Like, and I think about being in spaces where I've had to say like, this is just not, like that's not it. And I think about that conversation with that kid is like a good example of like I felt uncomfortable because I know he was hoping for me to give him this speech about like, fight the power. And it's like, you can actually fight the power best by being an amazing teacher every day. And like this other stuff might be a distraction sometimes if your kids don't have the core skills. Last question is, what is a piece of advice that you've gotten over the years that stuck with you? We'll start with you.
With me?
Yes.
Educate, organize, and repeat. And I didn't understand that at first when I started sort of like getting into this work. But I think it's important to organize and mobilize, but also educate the people while you're doing it, and to also understand like the structures that are oppressing us as you go out into the streets and yell it out, right? I think like you said earlier, you know, we have a lot of people that are, I think social justice has become a fetish to some people, and I think they like the idea of like going out to the streets and like saying, yo, I'm woke, like, yeah, I went out to this rally, did you know what happened? Or like posting it, you know, doing a live video, whatever. But I don't think a lot of them are able to explain, like, what is it that you're fighting for, though? Mm-hmm. Like, if you were to sit down right now with the President of the United States, well, not this one, but the next one, right? Or hopefully we have a better one. Or with someone who could provide you with the answers, what would you tell them if you were given that opportunity? Would you be able to explain it? And I think that goes back to just educating yourself while you're organizing. So yeah.
Cool. It may be sort of generic, but I heard it when I was young, and I really love it, and it always stuck with me. You know, be the change that you want to see in the world. I really feel that one person can make a difference, whether it be in their small community, whether it be in a big open setting like this. I mean, look, me and Natalia are making a difference, and we're here sitting with you. I think that's awesome. You know what I mean? So I really feel that being the change you want to see for yourself as a goal, you know, is first and foremost, and, you know, then the other things will follow.
Cool.
Prepare your work for rejection. What I think was the best advice that I still hear and resonates in my head all the time, and it's made me prepare, you know, deeply for what I'm about to embark on. It's made me like have a chip on my shoulder, you know, that has motivated me and given me anger, you know, and motivation and hope. Knowing that people are going to try and like identify the holes in what you're presenting. So if you prepare your work for rejection, then you're ready for that and you're armed for it.
I think about mine, I had to learn this notion of not responding to pain with pain. That there'd be all these moments where, you know, and I definitely in the classroom and since get a lot of feedback coming in, and I had to figure out how to like take the message without taking the way the message was delivered, like equally, that those are two different things. And all of you who teach know that like if you flipped out every time a student flipped out, it'd be a harder profession. And it was this moment of like, I didn't have the language, but somebody said that to me and I was like, you're right. Like, I don't need to respond to pain with pain. I can manage a way that I respond to this and I can receive the message without receiving the packaging. Cool, we appreciate you being a part of this conversation today. It's an honor to be here. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Give it up for DeRay, Natalia, and Ryan.